We continue now at the top of Daf Zayin Amud Aleph and Mesechet Kesubos. This is Kesubos Daf 7a. The Gemara here continues Potter. Again, this is talking about a situation where you take the pus out. So it says it's Potter, and Rashi over here says Potter v'kaimel and Potter umutter. We say in Mesechet Shabbos that what this Mishnah really means is that it's mutter to take the pus out on Shabbos. Mutter lechatchila b'yetzias Shabbos. So kash laman do asar. So it's a question according to the one who prohibits to have relations for the first time on Shabbos because of the taking out of the blood. Why is that any different than the pus? Tahainami lahotzi damu. That's to take out the blood. This is to take out, by the case of the Mapis Mor, so it's a very similar case. So that's the question of the Gemara. And so to that, the Gemara says, Hasam pakid v'akir. Rashi says, Hasam gabelecha over there when it comes to the pus. Pakud konus biyachad. It's completely gathered together. It's like its own little pocket. V'akir kulam min abasar. It's completely detached from any skin. V'yomed lotzes. It's ready to come out, so that's why it's permitted. But over here, pakid v'lakir. It's true that it's gathered together, but it's not completely detached from the walls of the skin. Hacha dam besulim pakid hu v'lakir lagamri. It's not completely akir. Elanivla k'tzas b'chsalim. It's a little bit absorbed into the walls of the womb. Avabisheinu mechuber. Now, even though it's not called mechuber, connected, keshar dam hoivarim, like other blood, elakanas, rather it's gathered. Miu doma lemechuberhu. Nevertheless, it's similar to mechuber. Sheinu muchan lotzes kalecha. It's not the same thing like pus that is ready to come out. So that's the distinction. And the Gemara continues, Rabbi Ami shara lemivel b'tchila b'Shabbos. Rabbi Ami said that it is permitted to have relations for the first time on Shabbos. Amri le Rabbanan, so the Rabbanan said to him, V'halo ksiva ksubasa, but the case that in that particular case, the ksuba wasn't written yet, so you shouldn't be able to have relations for a different reason, because there was no ksuba. So Amar Lu, so he said to them, Atvasu metaltalin, there's a very simple solution to that. Give her some metaltalin as a collateral for the ksuba, and that is sufficient. Rashi says, Atvasu metaltali tenula metaltalin tachas yad b'mashkon. Give her some movable objects as a collateral for it, l'shibur ksubasa, ad sheyichtavu shtar ksuba, until you actually do write the shtar b'shibur karkos. And then already you'll have a lien on karka. That'll be, so to speak, a higher level, but until then, you give her metaltalin. Rav Zavid, shara l'mivel b'tchila b'Shabbos. The Gemara continues, that Rav Zavid also allowed relations for the first time on Shabbos. Ika diamri, there are those who say Rav Zavid gufe boal b'tchila b'Shabbos. Rav Zavid himself actually had an act of relations the first time on Shabbos. Rav Yehuda shara l'mivel b'tchila b'yomtiv. Rav Yehuda allowed the first act of relations to be on Yontiv. Amar Rav Papi mishmei de Rava. Rav Papi said in the name of Rava, lo tema b'yontiv d'shari ha-b'Shabbos aser. Don't think that means to say that only on Yontiv it's permitted, but on Shabbos it would be aser. Dehu adin dafilu b'Shabbos nami shari. Really, he would have permitted it on Shabbos as well. It just happens to be, the incident was that it took place on Yontif. And the Gemara continues, Rav Papa Mishmei de Rava Amar, Rav Papa in the name of Rava says, B'yomtiv shari b'Shabbos aser. There is a distinction. On Yontiv it's permitted for the first time, but on Shabbos it would actually be prohibited. Amar le Rav Papi le Rav Papa. So Rav Papi said to Rav Papa, my daitach, what are you thinking to make this distinction? Mitoch shehutra chabur letzorech. What it seems like you're thinking is as follows. Since you're allowed to make a wound letzorech ochel nefesh, meaning on Yontiv, you're allowed to do malacha if it has to do with the preparation of food. And so the example over there would be shchita. Let's say you shecht an animal, that's permissible on Yontiv. So hutranami shalol letzorech. So it's permissible also to make a wound, even if it's not for the purposes of preparing food, such as an act of relations. In other words, you're using this principle of mitoch, which applies on Yontiv because of the heter v'ochel nefesh. But he says, elamayata, but according to that logic, mutter lasos mugmar b'Yontiv, would also be permitted to burn incense on Yontiv. Rashi over here says, mugmar b'samim alo eish. They used to take some b'samim, some spices on fire, l'gamer es hakelim es ha-begadim, and it was in order you would put it by the begadim to put a scent to those begadim. So that should also be permitted on Yontiv. Why? Because since you're allowed to burn things for the purpose of food on Yontiv, so it should be permitted also, even if it's not for the purpose of food. And so the Gemara says, no, that's not true. You don't take it so far. Amar Lei said back to him, Alecha Amar Kra, no, to you the pasuk says, Achasher Yachel L'chol Nefesh. The idea of Ochel Nefesh is L'chol Nefesh. Davar Hashava L'chol Nefesh. It has to be something that everybody really appreciates. Not everybody. Everybody can appreciate Be'ila, the act of relations, but not everybody can appreciate Mugmar. That was only something for people who were very picky, very finicky. They would do things like Mugmar. Rashi over here says, Alecha Amar Kra, L'chol Nefesh, Davar Hashava L'chol Nefesh, Mutter be'ilo shava lakol. Again, the act of relations, that's for everyone. Aval mugmar eino ela lemefunakim, but mugmar was really only for delicate people, and so therefore that's not something that's going to be permitted. And so the Gemara continues, Amar le Rav Acha b'rei de Rava le Rav Ashi. So Rav Acha, the son of Rava, said to Rav Ashi, Ela me'ata, but according to that, if you're going to make this distinction about shava l'chol nefesh, nizdamin lo tzvi b'yontiv. Let's say a person has a deer that appears to him, and he could be eating the deer on yontiv. Hoel veino shava l'chol nefesh. That's not something that everybody eats. Not everybody eats the meat of deer. So hachinami do asur l'mishchate. So are you going to say it's asur to shecht the tzvi, the deer? So Amar Lei, so he said back to him, Ano davar hatzorech l'chol nefesh kamin. I'm talking about something that is needed. L'chol nefesh and tzvi, tzarech l'chol nefesh. So a deer actually is considered tzarech l'chol nefesh. In other words, not everybody eats it. It's true, because they don't have the opportunity. But if they have the opportunity, they would appreciate having the tzvi, eating the tzvi. But that would not be true by mugmor. Not everybody would even appreciate that as something that they would want. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rabbi Yaakov Bar Idi. Rabbi Yaakov Bar Idi says, Hora Rabbi Yochanan b'Tzaydon. Rabbi Yochanan issued the following ruling in Sidon, Asur livol b'tchila b'Shabbos, that it is forbidden to have the act of relations the first time on Shabbos. And the Gemara now asks a side question, Umi ika hora l'isr. Do you use the language of hora when you are prohibiting something? Do we ever find that language, hora Rabbi Yochanan b'Tzidon, that he said it was asr? And the Gemara says, yes, we do find such a language. But Tanan, as we learned in the Mishnah, horua Beis Hillel, that Beis Hillel, they issued the following ruling, shetehei nazira od sheva shana macheros. They said she had to be a nazira, she had to be like a nazir for another 7 years. We'll see Rashi on that in a moment. Or you can bring a proof from the following brisa that we use this kind of language. It says chut hashedra shenifsak berubo divrei Rebbe. So let's say you have the spinal cord. So if the majority has an injury, that makes it a treifa. Rabbi Yaakov says afilu nikef. No, even if there's just one hole there, a piercing there, that's enough to make it considered like a treifa. And then it uses the same language. Hora Rebbe ke Rabbi Yaakov. Rebbe ended up issuing the ruling to be strict like Rabbi Yaakov. That's the word hora being used by a prohibition. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rav Huna says, nevertheless, Ein halacha Rabbi Yaakov. The halacha is not like Rabbi Yaakov. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Masni Hachi. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, he taught as follows. Amar Rabbi Avo said, Shal Rabbi Shmuel ben Yaakov de min Tzur as Rabbi Yochanan b'Tzaydon. That Rabbi Shmuel ben Yaakov from Tzur asked Rabbi Yochanan in Sidon, V'ana Shami, and I heard this question asked, Mahu livol b'tchila v'Shabbos. What is the halacha in terms of having the first act of relations on Shabbos? V'yamar le, and he responded to him, and he said, Asr, that it is Asr to do it. But the Gemara says, V'hilchas the halacha actually is mutter livol b'tchila v'Shabbos, that it is mutter to have the first act of relations on Shabbos. And Rashi over here explains, U'mi'ika hora l'isr. The Gemara asks, can you use the language of hora when you're forbidding something? Rashi explains the question, U'mikari isr hora. Would you call that a ruling? Why? Mishum d'chol adam rashoy lahachmer, because anybody can be strict. Va'oser ein zasmichas devar. The fact that someone tells you something is aser, that's nothing to rely on. Shafilu min asafik she'ein halacha brura lo hu bavi oser. Let's say the person didn't know the halacha, so he would tell you it's aser. That's not really a ruling. Aval hamater. Now, if you would go to someone and they'd say it's mutter, so somech al shmuah, so that he's relying on his understanding. Awal svarz chachmaso v'hora. That's called a hora, but you can't use the word hora. At least that's the Gemara's question. You can't use the word hora when a person just says to me machmir. And so the Gemara says, no, you could use that language. Horua Beis Hillel Mishnahi b'Meseches Nazir. There's a Mishnah in Meseches Nazir. Again, it said that she was a Nazir for an additional 7 years, according to Beis Hillel. Behilni Hamalka, the story there was with Hilni, the queen. Sheyatza ben Olam Milchama, her son went out to war. V'nadra Shevashanim ben Nazir, and so she said that she's going to be a Nazir in Nazirus for 7 years. But she did that. She fulfilled that b'chutz la'aretz. She fulfilled her promise in chutz la'aretz. V'also la'aretz. Then she went up to Eretz Yisrael. So Horua Beis Hillel Shetei Nazir O Zayin Shana Machero. So Beis Hillel said chutz la'aretz there is an area that's tamei. It's not a fulfillment of your neder to become a Nazir. Again, she wanted to do it for the sake of her son, that he should be protected. So the Beis Hillel said, and they use the language of Horua, you need to do another 7 years in Eretz Yisrael. Chut hasheder shenifsak barubo. Again, the spinal cord, the majority of it is broken, so that's called a treifa. And so again, there was a machlokus over there, and they use this language of horua to be strict, or hora Rebbe rather, to be strict in that case. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. Amar Rabbi Chelbo, Amar Rav Huna, Amar Rabbi Abba Bar Zavda, Amar Rav. Rabbi Chelbo says that Rav Huna said, that Rav Abba bar Zavda said, that Rav said as follows: Achas besula v'achas almana. Whether you're talking about a marriage of a besula or whether you're talking about a marriage of an almana, to una bracha, there's a requirement of bracha. This is referring to the fact that we say sheva brachas. The Gemara says, Rav Huna hachi, did Rav Huna really say that? Again, Rav Huna here is in the quote. He's the one quoting Rabbi Abba bar Zavda in the name of Rav. V'yamar Rav Huna, but didn't Rav Huna say the opposite? He said, almana eina tuna bracha, that there's no requirement of a bracha by the almana when she gets married. And the Gemara says, lo kash, it's not difficult. Kan bebacher shenas almana. In a case where the person is a young man who's never been married and marries an almana, so there's a requirement of bracha. But kan be almon shenas almana. But if a widow, meaning the man, is also going to be a situation where he's a widower and he marries a widow, so in that case the almon marries the almana, there's no requirement. And the Gemara says, "V'almon shenas almana lo." But is that true? If an almon marries an almana, there's no requirement. V'amar Rav Nachman, but Rav Nachman said, "Amar li Huna bar Nasan," that Huna bar Nasan said to me, "Tana was taught minayin lebirchas chasanim be'asara." Where's the source that when we do the bracha of the chasanim, that we do it with 10 people? Shenemar, like the pasuk says, this is talking about when Boaz married Ruth. It says he took 10 men from the elders of the city. Vayomer shvu po vayeshvu. He said, sit here, and they sat. And in that case, also there was 10 people, and this is the source for birchas chasanim with 10 people. Boaz was an almon shenas almana have, exactly that case. It was a case of an almon that married an almana, and apparently there was a requirement of bracha of birchas chasanim. And so the Gemara says, no, my eina tuna bracha. What does it mean when we say that the almon that marries the almana, there's no requirement of bracha? What that means is simply as follows. It means to say, the Amar Rav Huna eina tuna bracha kol zayin. It just means that you don't require sheva brachas for 7 days. Aval yom echad tuna bracha, but there would be a requirement of sheva brachas for 1 day, even in a situation where an almon marries an almana. And so the Gemara continues 1 second. But what about the Brisa, which says Shakdu Chacham al Takanos Benos Yisrael, that the Chachamim were diligent when it came to helping out the Benos Yisrael, the daughters of Israel. Shehei Sameach Ima Gimel Yamim. There it says that he should celebrate with her for 3 days. We said earlier that he shouldn't be working; he should celebrate together with her for 3 days. So b'mai. So now, what's the case they're talking about? Iba Bacher. If it's talking about a Bacher that's with an Almana, Ha'amrit Shiva. So there you already said that it's 7 days. That's what we said before. That by a Bacher that's with an Almana, there's a requirement for 7 days. And Iba Almon, and if it's an Almon that's with an Almana, Ha'amrit Yom Echad. So there you said it's 1 day. Where do we have 3 days? And so the Gemara answers, if you want, I could say as follows. Be'almon, when you have an almon with an almona, yom echad lebracha, what we mean to say is there's 1 day of Shabbat brachas, ushlosh l'simcha, but there still has to be 3 days of celebration where he shouldn't be going to work. Or if you want, I could say as follows. Be'bachor, shiva lebracha. It could be that when it's a bachor that marries an almona, so it's 7 days of Shabbat brachas, ushlosh l'simcha, but there's only 3 days where it has to be of simcha. Again, 3 days where of celebration. And we'll take a look at Rashi over here, to una bracha, birchas chasanim. Again, the Gemara began and said it doesn't matter if it's a basula or almana. There is a requirement of this birchas chasanim, what we refer to as sheva brachas. Boaz almon have, and the Gemara says, well, there is sheva brachas even by an almon, because Boaz. Diomar mar evson ze Boaz uchvar hayu lo lamid bonim ushloshim bonos. But Baba Basra says he was previously married, he had children. And Rashi continues, the Gemara said amrit shiva, that by a bacher the Gemara assumed there would be 7 days of sheva brachas. Where does the Gemara get that? To mean the eina tuna de kamarav huno kimna de eina tuna shiva, because in the original statement where it said it's not required, you were saying you're not requiring 7 days. Mechlal de tuna, so that implies that when the Gemara ultimately said it is required, to come Rabbi Abba, when Rabbi Abba said it is required, shiva. So when it was a bacher, we were saying there were 7 days of Shabbat bracha. So that's what the Gemara's question was. Again, by a bacher it's 7 days, by an almon it's 1 day. So where do you see 3 days? And we'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Zayin Amud Beis.